You did everything right. You prayed before making the decision. You asked God for clarity. You walked through that door believing it was Him who opened it. You obeyed, you trusted, you stood in faith, but then it all fell apart. The opportunity vanished, the relationship broke, the dream crumbled, and you were left standing in the wreckage of what used to be, asking the question that so many have whispered in the dark, God, why? It didn't make sense. You weren't in rebellion. You weren't chasing sin. You were following God, and still you lost the job. They betrayed you. The door slammed shut in your face. The prayers didn't stop the pain. The fasting didn't block the storm. You thought obedience would exempt you from the fire, but instead you found yourself in it. Confused, disappointed, hurting, you started to question if you missed God. If maybe you misheard Him, you replayed the moments over and over trying to find the wrong turn. You blamed yourself. You blamed others. And secretly, you even blamed God, because deep down, you thought obedience guaranteed outcomes. But now you're learning God never promised that the path of obedience would be painless. He promised it would be purposeful. There's a silence that follows shattered expectations, a heaviness that comes when you did everything right and it still went wrong, and in that silence the enemy whispers lies. God forgot you. You're being punished. You wasted your time. But hear this, just because it broke doesn't mean it was bad. Just because it ended doesn't mean it was wasted. And just because it hurt doesn't mean God wasn't in it. God is not just the God of the open door, He's also the God of the closed one. He's not just present in promotion, He's sovereign in rejection. What doesn't make sense now will one day be the very thing that defines your faith. Because sometimes the pain that made no sense becomes the platform for purpose. The thing that hurt you the most may be the thing God uses the most. The season you wanted to skip may be the season that shapes you the deepest. And the setback that made you question everything may be the very setup God uses to launch you into destiny. So yes, it hurt. Yes, you cried. Yes, it made no sense, but you're still here. And that means the story isn't over. The pain was real, but so is the promise. And what looks like the end is only the beginning of something God is orchestrating behind the scenes. You just haven't seen it yet. You cried over what ended. You mourned the loss. You grieved the closed door like it was the death of your destiny. What you thought would last didn't. What you believed would work failed. And while you were wiping your tears and asking God why it had to happen, heaven was silent. But silence is not absence. Just because you couldn't hear Him doesn't mean He wasn't working. God sees what you can't. He sees the storm forming before the sky changes. He sees the heart before the words are spoken. He sees the trap while you're still walking in trust. And sometimes His greatest act of mercy is letting things fall apart before they can destroy you. You called it rejection, but heaven called it protection. You thought He was taking something from you, but He was actually saving you from something that would have taken you. You wanted the relationship to work. You begged Him to keep it together, but God saw what was hidden behind smiles and promises. He saw the betrayal 5 years down the line. He saw the compromise that would have pulled you away from Him, so He ended it. Not because He was being cruel, but because He loves you too much to let you settle for less than His best. You applied for the job. You prayed over the opportunity. You even felt peace about it. But the door slammed shut. And you were left questioning whether you even hear God at all. But what you didn't see was the toxic environment behind that paycheck, the spiritual dryness, the compromise it would have cost you. God wasn't punishing you, He was positioning you. He doesn't just lead by what He allows, He leads by what He withholds. And every door He didn't open was an act of intentional love. Every relationship He didn't bless was a divine block. Every delay, every detour, every no was wrapped in wisdom you didn't yet understand, because you see the moment, but God sees eternity. You see what you lost, but God sees what He's leading you into. He's not reacting, He's orchestrating. He's not trying to hurt you, He's trying to heal you. But sometimes the healing comes through heartbreak. Sometimes the blessing comes disguised as disappointment. So if you're crying over what broke, just know heaven isn't panicking. God isn't confused. He's not pacing the throne room wondering what to do next. He already made a way. He already wrote the next chapter. And while you're standing in front of a closed door wondering what happened, God is behind the scenes building a future you can't yet see. That wasn't rejection, it was redirection. And one day you'll thank Him for what didn't work out, because what He has planned is greater than what you were praying for. Sometimes God allows things to break, not to destroy you, but to realign you. Like a bone that heals the wrong way, you can't move into purpose with crooked foundations, so He resets what you built. He cracks open what you tried to cover. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it feels like loss. But what you call broken, heaven calls corrected. You thought it was stable. You thought it was God because it looked good, felt good, and made sense. But God doesn't build on what seems right. He builds on what's truly aligned with His will. And if the structure of your life is leaning on pride, fear, or false identity, He will allow it to collapse, not because He wants to hurt you, but because He loves you too much to let you grow in the wrong direction. The pain is not punishment. The breaking is not rejection. It's alignment. It's grace in disguise. Just like a doctor must re-break a bone that healed wrong to restore full strength and mobility, God sometimes has to interrupt your life to restore your purpose, because you've settled into patterns that don't match your calling. You've accepted rhythms that look normal to the world but are out of sync with heaven. You were praying for elevation, but God saw you weren't ready. You wanted acceleration, but God saw the cracks in your character. You asked for more, but He knew that the current version of you couldn't carry the weight of the blessing. So He broke it. He stripped it. He tore down what you thought was progress so He could rebuild on a firmer foundation. You were heading in the right direction with the wrong priorities. You were surrounded by the wrong people in the right season, and instead of gently correcting, God allowed a breaking, not to ruin your momentum, but to redirect it. He allowed the friendship to collapse. He allowed the plan to fail, because the longer you walk in misalignment, the more it costs your destiny. What you lost was not wasted. What you wept over was not in vain. God doesn't just heal, He aligns. He doesn't just restore what was, He reshapes what will be. And that process hurts. But pain doesn't mean absence. Pain often signals the presence of divine surgery. You didn't break because you were weak. You broke because you were loved. Because God wouldn't let you carry dysfunction into destiny, because He refused to let comfort rob you of calling. He broke it, but only so He could rebuild it right. And when He does, you'll realize the breaking wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a stronger, straighter, and more spirit-aligned version of you. Joseph didn't sin, he didn't rebel, he didn't run from God. All he did was dream, all he did was speak what he saw, but even with a pure heart and a God-given vision, he still found himself at the bottom of a pit, betrayed by the very people who should have protected him, thrown away by his own brothers, not because he did wrong, but because destiny had to take a different path. And maybe like Joseph, your pit season wasn't punishment, it was preparation. It's hard to understand why you had to go through what you went through when your heart was clean. You weren't perfect, but you were faithful. You weren't chasing the world. You were pursuing purpose, and yet life still pushed you down. The people you loved turned on you. The plans you held on to unraveled. You ended up in a low place wondering what you did to deserve it. But hear this, God doesn't just use the palace, He uses the pit. The pit is not the end, it's the beginning of a process. Before Joseph could wear the robe of rulership, he had to wear the weight of rejection. Before he could interpret Pharaoh's dream, he had to survive the silence of being forgotten. The pit was not a detour, it was part of the design. Because purpose doesn't grow on mountaintops. It's forged in the dark places, in the places where no one sees you, where it looks like God has left you, but in reality, He's shaping you. God allowed the pit because He was preserving the promise. If Joseph had stayed comfortable at home, he never would have made it to Egypt. And if he never made it to Egypt, he never would have interpreted the dream that saved a nation. You're crying over who betrayed you, but God is orchestrating something bigger than their rejection. Their hands may have thrown you in the pit, but heaven is still in control of your story. You don't have to understand the pit. You just have to trust the purpose behind it. Because the same God who allowed the drop is the same God who will raise you up. Joseph didn't stay in the pit. He didn't die in prison. He rose, and when he did, he didn't rise with bitterness. He rose with authority. What tried to bury him became the very soil that grew his influence. So if you're in a pit season, if you feel overlooked, abandoned, or forgotten, remember Joseph. Remember that calling doesn't exempt you from pain, it prepares you through it. The pit didn't destroy the dream, it developed the dreamer. And just like Joseph, your fall was not a failure, it was a setup for your elevation. You knocked, you fasted, you waited, you believed, and the door still didn't open. You were sure it was the one. It looked right, it felt right, it aligned with your plans, and yet God said no, or worse, He said nothing. The silence felt like rejection. The closed door felt like failure. But what you didn't realize is that His no was mercy. His silence was protection, because while you were begging for the door to open, He was blocking what would have broken you. God doesn't close doors to frustrate you. He closes them to preserve you. He sees what's behind the opportunity you're chasing. He sees the compromise behind the promotion. He sees the heartbreak behind that relationship. He sees the weariness behind the job title. And while you're crying over what didn't happen, heaven is rejoicing over what didn't have to happen. You think the delay is punishment, but it's actually deliverance. You think He's holding you back, but He's holding you together. Because what you wanted wasn't sustainable. What you thought was a blessing would have become a burden. And if God opened every door you asked Him to, some of them would have led you straight into destruction. You see the moment, but God sees the future. You see the opportunity, but He sees the cost. And sometimes the most loving thing God can do is say no. Not because you're unworthy, not because you didn't pray hard enough, but because His yes is reserved for what's aligned with your destiny, not just your desire. Think about it. How many doors have you walked through that you later wish stayed shut? How many times have you thanked God for what He didn't give you? The people who walked away, the jobs you didn't get, the dreams that didn't unfold the way you imagined. At first, it felt like rejection, but looking back, you see it now. It was God rerouting your path to something better. He doesn't just open doors, He guards them, because you're not just anyone. You're His child, and He loves you too much to let you settle for what looks good when He has what is good. Every closed door is not a failure. Sometimes it's a filter. God filtering out what can't go with you into your next. So don't curse the closed door. Don't mourn the missed opportunity. Thank Him, praise Him, because when God says no, it's never without reason. When He delays, it's never without purpose. One day you'll look back and realize the door He didn't open was the blessing that kept you in alignment with your destiny. He didn't fail you, He saved you. Israel didn't walk out of Egypt and straight into the promised land. They passed through the wilderness, a dry, empty, confusing place, a place that didn't match the promise, a place where nothing made sense. But God led them there, not to punish them, but to prepare them. Because before they could possess the land, they had to be transformed in the desert. The wilderness is not a mistake, it's a setup. It's the space between who you were and who you're called to become. It's where God strips away the Egypt that clings to your soul, the old mindsets, the slave mentality, the fear, the doubt, the habits that don't fit your future. God uses the wilderness to detox your spirit because you can't walk in promise with a survival mindset. In Egypt, they depended on Pharaoh. In the wilderness, they had to depend on God. Manna didn't come from a marketplace, it fell from heaven. Water didn't come from a well, it flowed from a rock. God allowed lack to teach them trust. He let them feel hunger so they would know the source. He let them walk through unfamiliar terrain so they would learn to follow, not their own wisdom, but His voice. It was in the wilderness that He spoke identity. It was in the wilderness that He revealed His glory. It was in the wilderness that He taught them how to worship in the absence of comfort. Because if you can praise in the dry place, you won't forget Him when you reach the land flowing with milk and honey. You thought God had forgotten you. You thought the delay meant disqualification. But the wilderness isn't a curse. It's a classroom. It's where faith is built in the absence of sight. It's where God trains your hands for battle, even when you don't see a war. It's where He toughens your spirit, sharpens your ears, and breaks the pride that would have ruined you in Canaan. Don't despise the wilderness. Don't rush the process. It may not feel like destiny, but it's where destiny is being forged. Israel needed the desert, not for the sand, but for the stripping, not for the wandering, but for the wondering. To wonder at God's power, His provision, His presence. And you too will come out of this season, but you won't come out the same. You'll come out refined, stronger, wiser, aligned, ready, because God never wastes a wilderness, what you thought was a detour. Success can cover what struggle reveals. Prosperity can make dysfunction look polished. When everything's going well, it's easy to overlook what's broken. The applause drowns out the warning signs. The progress blinds you to the compromise. But when the setback hits, when the deal falls through, the platform crumbles, the people walk away, what's real is exposed. God will sometimes use a setback not to punish you, but to reveal you, to show you what was never stable to begin with, to pull back the curtain on relationships, habits, and mindsets that were dressed in success but hollow underneath. Because what you couldn't see in the blessing becomes undeniable in the breaking. You thought the relationship was strong until the pressure came. You thought the plan was solid until the doors slammed shut and it hurt, it shook you. But what if the shaking wasn't to destroy you, but to wake you, to show you what couldn't go with you into your next season? God loves you too much to let you carry dead weight into destiny. The setback didn't introduce the flaw, it revealed it. The pride that was hiding under performance, the fear that was masked by busy schedules, the people who were there for the platform, not the person. When everything fell apart, so did the illusions, and that was grace, because exposure brings clarity, and clarity leads to alignment. Sometimes God lets you lose what was propping you up so you can learn what actually holds you together. He removes the counterfeit to prepare you for the authentic. He tears down what was unstable to rebuild what is unshakable. And though the disappointment feels like death, It's really deliverance. He's delivering you from relying on what was never meant to sustain you. You prayed for elevation. You asked God to take you higher, but He knew that what was hiding in your foundation would have collapsed under the weight of your next level. So before He promoted you, He exposed what needed healing. He highlighted the cracks, not to embarrass you, but to strengthen you. Because in the kingdom, what gets exposed gets healed. What gets surrendered gets redeemed. Don't despise the disappointment. Don't resent the loss. God used it to cleanse your circle, purify your motives, and deepen your dependence. What you thought was the end was actually the beginning of something truer, stronger, and more aligned with His purpose for your life. The setback didn't disqualify you. It refined you. It revealed what needed to go so that purpose could grow. And when you step into your next season, you'll realize that what felt like the worst thing that could happen was the very thing God used to protect, prepare, and position you for what's coming next. The enemy thought it would break you. He thought if he hit hard enough, you'd stay down. If he could bring betrayal, you'd stop trusting. If he could cause the delay, you'd stop believing. If he could stir up loss, you'd walk away from purpose. But what he meant for evil, God meant for good. He didn't stop the attack, but he flipped it for His glory. Joseph said it best in Genesis 50:20. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. He wasn't just quoting scripture, he was living revelation. He had lived through betrayal, rejection, false accusation, and years of being forgotten. And yet, when he finally stood in the place of authority, he could see it clearly. Every wound had a purpose. Every pit was a setup. Every prison was a hallway to the palace. God didn't cancel the enemy's plan. He hijacked it. That's how powerful your God is. He doesn't need to prevent the enemy's move. He just needs to allow it long enough to fulfill His own. The enemy brought pain, but God birthed purpose through it. The enemy tried to shut your mouth, but God used it to strengthen your voice. The enemy thought the setback would silence you, but it became the foundation of your testimony. What was meant to destroy you became the very thing God used to define you. God is not intimidated by the devil's strategies. He already factored them into the plan. He already wrote redemption into your suffering. He already designed a comeback for every crisis. You're crying over what hurt you, but heaven is rejoicing over what's coming from it, because nothing you've walked through will be wasted, not the betrayal, not the breakdown, not the sleepless nights. He will use all of it. The enemy wanted you to quit, but instead you got wiser. He wanted you bitter, but you became more compassionate. He wanted you insecure, but you grew bold in your identity. The very area the enemy attacked the most is the very area God is going to use the most. Because heaven always makes the enemy pay for what he tried to steal. You may not have chosen the fire, but God used it to refine you. You didn't ask for the storm, but God used it to anchor you. You wouldn't have picked the battle, but God used it to build you. And now you don't just have survival, you have testimony. You don't just have scars, you have authority. So if you're in the middle of a storm right now, remember, God doesn't just rescue, He rebuilds. He doesn't just deliver you from evil, He transforms it into good. What the enemy meant for evil, God meant for glory. God could have done it quicker. He could have opened the door last year. He could have answered the prayer when you first cried out. He could have moved the mountain the moment you believed, but instead, He delayed. And while you waited, you started wondering if He changed His mind, if you missed the moment, if the promise expired. But what if the delay wasn't a denial? What if it was a stage being set? He didn't rush the process because He wasn't just building the promise, He was building you. There were things He needed to refine, character that had to be forged, pride that had to die, trust that had to deepen, because if He gave you the platform before He gave you the depth, it would have crushed you. If he gave you visibility without stability, the weight of the blessing would have become a burden. God is never in a hurry. He's never rushed by pressure or timelines. He doesn't respond to your clock. He moves according to his purpose, and sometimes that purpose requires waiting, because waiting births something that winning never could. It births strength, patience, endurance, dependence. It burns away entitlement and awakens hunger. It teaches you how to worship with no spotlight, how to trust with no evidence, how to believe when nothing is moving. David was anointed king as a teenager, but he didn't wear the crown until years later. He served in caves before he sat on thrones. He dodged spears before he picked up scepters. Why? Because the stage wasn't ready, and neither was he. But when the time came, there was no doubt who God had chosen. The delay wasn't wasted. It was woven into the design. You think the silence means God forgot, but heaven is just preparing the announcement. Every day you feel unseen is a day he's building something behind the curtain. Every not yet is an echo of just wait and see. Because when he moves, it won't be small. When he opens the door, it won't just be for a moment, it will be for legacy. The longer the delay, the louder the testimony. The more time it takes, the more people will see his hand when it happens. That's why it's taking time. Because this is not just about you getting a breakthrough, it's about him getting the glory. He's setting the stage so that when it finally unfolds, no one will be able to say it was luck, connections, or chance. They'll know it was God. So don't despise the delay, embrace it, because while you're waiting, God is working. And when he finally moves, everything will make sense. The wait will have been worth it. The pain will have purpose. And the stage will already be set for everything he promised to be revealed. Divine setups rarely come wrapped in comfort. They don't announce themselves with bright lights and perfect timing. No, more often than not, they show up dressed like loss, like failure, like heartbreak. What looks like defeat to man is often the beginning of destiny in God's hands. Because heaven doesn't operate by human optics. What feels like the end is usually just the hidden entrance to your next chapter. Look at the cross. To everyone watching, it looked like Jesus had lost. The crowd mocked. The sky went dark. The tomb was sealed. It looked like the enemy had won. But what they didn't know was that death wasn't the end of the story. It was part of the plan. The crucifixion wasn't a defeat. It was a doorway, a setup for resurrection. What Satan called final, God called finished. And the same is true in your life. The loss you mourned, the opportunity that slipped through your fingers, the moment you thought it was over, that wasn't the end. It was a setup. God was positioning you for something you couldn't yet see, because some victories require a grave, some breakthroughs require a breaking, and sometimes you have to lose the visible to gain the eternal. You prayed for God to use you. You asked him for purpose, but when he started stripping things away, you panicked. You thought he changed his mind, but this is how he works. He removes what looks like strength so he can replace it with real power. He takes what you think you need and reveals that all you've ever needed was him. The blessing is often buried beneath what first feels like a burden. The door that shut didn't close to hurt you. It closed to reroute you. The friend that left didn't walk away to destroy you. They made room for divine alignment. The season that ended didn't expire by accident. God signed off on it. And even if it felt like you lost, heaven was writing victory behind the scenes. The setup of God often begins with the surrender of your plans. He'll let your dream die so he can raise up his purpose. He'll let the spotlight fade so he can work in the dark. He'll allow the fall so that when you rise, there's no question God did this. Not your strength, not your connections, not your brilliance, but grace, favor, resurrection power. So if you're standing in what feels like failure, don't call it over. You might be standing in a setup. God's about to prove that His greatest works are born in the moments we least expect. What looked like defeat is just the soil for your comeback. And when He resurrects what seemed dead, no one will be able to deny this was the hand of God. God wastes nothing, not a single tear, not a single moment of pain, not one silent night where you felt forgotten, nor one battle you barely made it through. Everything you've walked through, everything that tried to break you, every scar you carry, it all has purpose. Because in the kingdom, your pain is never just about you. God doesn't just heal you for you. He heals you so you can carry healing to others. You thought it was going to crush you. You thought the divorce, the loss, the betrayal, the depression, the failure was the end. But God was already writing the next chapter, not just for your restoration, but for someone else's deliverance. What once made you weep will one day give you a voice to speak into someone else's darkness. What tried to destroy you will become the evidence of God's power in your life. There will be a moment when someone sits across from you, broken in the same way you once were, and you'll look them in the eyes and say, "I've been there. I made it, and so will you." That moment is why you didn't give up. That moment is why God kept you. That moment is why the fire didn't consume you, because your survival wasn't just survival, it was seed. And God intends to multiply it. Your story is someone else's survival guide. Your journey becomes someone else's compass. And your testimony becomes proof that God still redeems, still restores, still brings beauty from ashes. People don't need perfect, they need real. And your real story carries more power than you think. Joseph didn't go through the pit and prison for nothing. His pain positioned him to preserve an entire nation. Had he not been betrayed, falsely accused, and forgotten, he never would have been in the right place at the right time to save lives. What looked like personal suffering became divine strategy. And it's the same with you. Don't hide your scars. Don't be ashamed of your story. God didn't bring you through it just so you could keep it to yourself. There's someone drowning in the very thing you were delivered from. There's someone praying for the strength you now carry, and when you speak, when you share your truth, you become a living, breathing testimony of God's faithfulness. You thought the pain was pointless, but now you see it was preparation. God was shaping a voice, building compassion, deepening your authority, because He knew one day your breakthrough would break chains off someone else. So don't silence your story. It carries weight, it carries healing, it carries hope. Your pain wasn't just survived, it was sanctified, and now it's ready to bless. Now you can see it. Looking back, it finally makes sense. The pain, the rejection, the delay, the nights you cried wondering if God forgot you, the seasons you begged for doors to open and they didn't, the relationships that ended, the opportunities that slipped through your fingers. At the time, it felt like chaos, but now you realize it was strategy. You weren't being buried, you were being planted. Every tear watered the soil. Every heartbreak broke ground. Every setback dug deeper roots. And though it felt like darkness, it was actually development. Though it looked like stillness, it was sacred preparation. God was never absent. He was architecting, never idle. He was building. You thought He was withholding, but He was setting you up for glory. You thought the pit was punishment, but it was the passageway. You thought the wilderness was a waste, but it was where identity was forged. You thought the closed doors were rejection, but they were redirection to something greater. God didn't just protect you from what wasn't His will, He positioned you for what was. And now it's harvest time. This is the moment where you step into what He was preparing you for all along. Not because you earned it, but because you endured. Not because you were perfect, but because you stayed. You kept believing. You kept praying. You held on when it would have been easier to walk away. And now what you planted in pain, you're about to reap in power. This is the beauty of God's plan. What looked like loss was actually leverage. What the enemy tried to use to silence you only amplified your story. What broke you in one season built you in the next. And what tried to bury you is now testifying that seeds don't die, they grow. It had to happen the way it did. Not one step was wasted, not one detour was accidental. God was in every moment. In the silence He was speaking, in the waiting He was working, in the breaking He was building. And now as you stand on the other side, you don't just carry survival, you carry authority, you carry testimony, you carry glory. This is more than restoration, it's manifestation. The vision is no longer just a promise in your heart, it's becoming reality in your life. And when people see you, they won't just see what you've gained, they'll see the grace that carried you, the favor that preserved you, the glory that follows obedience. So stand tall. The waiting season is over. The suffering wasn't in vain. What was once buried is breaking the surface. This is the setup for glory. And now it's harvest time. It didn't feel like protection at the time. It felt like betrayal, like heartbreak, like unanswered prayers and closed doors. You thought they were supposed to stay. You thought that connection, that friendship, that relationship was forever. But they walked out, or they changed, or it all fell apart in a way that made no sense. And you were left holding pieces of something you thought God had given. But here's the truth heaven knew all along. That wasn't betrayal. It was redirection. Divine, precise, necessary. Because while you were praying for peace, God was removing what would eventually rob it. While you were asking for purpose, He was clearing the path. You just didn't see it yet. We often beg God to bless us, then grieve when He does it His way. His way doesn't always look like addition. It looks like subtraction. He removes who you won't release, not because He's cruel, but because He's kind. Because He sees the whole picture, not just the present moment, because He hears conversations you didn't hear and sees motives you didn't see. He doesn't owe you an explanation. He offers you protection. You asked Him to guard your heart, so He did. You asked Him to guide your life, so He intervened. And now it feels like loss, but it's actually mercy. The people He took out of your life weren't equipped to carry what's coming. They were attached to your history, not your destiny. And He loves you too much to let you stay tied to someone who would sabotage your next season. Rejection hurts. It leaves questions. It leaves wounds. But it also leaves room for what's right, room for what's real, room for divine alignment and supernatural peace. And if you could see what He spared you from, you'd be thanking Him for every goodbye you used to cry over. Jesus was rejected too, by His own, betrayed by a friend, abandoned by those He poured Himself into. But the rejection wasn't a failure, it was fulfillment. It positioned Him to walk into purpose, and it will do the same for you. So if you're in that place right now, wondering why they left, why it ended, why it changed, don't rush to replace what God removed. Don't try to rescue what heaven let fall. Some rejections are not meant to be reversed. Some doors aren't meant to reopen. And that's not bitterness. It's wisdom. It's protection. You're not cursed. You're covered. And what felt like rejection was God's gentle way of pulling you out of a place that couldn't hold your calling. Rejection may have shaken you, but it didn't destroy you. It saved you, and soon you'll see why. Not everyone who starts the journey with you is meant to finish it beside you. That's one of the hardest lessons to accept when you're called, because loyalty feels holy, familiarity feels safe, and losing someone you thought was permanent feels like something went wrong. But in God's design, not every connection is meant to be carried into your next chapter. Some people are for a season, not a lifetime. You can love people deeply and still recognize when their role in your story has changed. And that's not unkind. It's obedience. Because destiny requires clarity, and sometimes clarity costs comfort. God isn't just building your life, He's protecting your purpose. And part of that protection is trimming your circle. not to isolate you, but to insulate what He's growing inside you. We get hurt when we confuse companionship with covenant. Just because someone walked with you doesn't mean they were called to you. They may have been an answer for a previous season, but their presence now could be a weight, not a wing. And if God is elevating you, He will also separate you. It's not personal, it's prophetic. Because every calling comes with a cost. And sometimes that cost is the company you keep. Jesus had crowds, then He had 12. But even within the 12, there were 3 who saw the deepest parts of His journey. God knows how to scale your circle to match your assignment, and He's not afraid to prune, because dead branches drain living roots, and the longer you try to keep expired relationships alive, the more energy you waste on what no longer serves your growth. Some of the people you're trying to hold on to are the very ones slowing you down. Not because they're bad, but because their season is up. And if you're honest, you've already sensed the shift. The conversations feel off. The connection feels forced. You're trying to carry something that's already been released, and God in His mercy is letting it fade, not to hurt you, but to prepare you. He's calling you forward, and forward means lighter. It means clearer. It means aligned. You won't need everyone in your past to enter your purpose. You just need the ones He's assigned, and those He sends will see you, support you, and speak life into the call on your life, not compete with it. Let Him do the trimming. Let Him reorder the table. It may feel like a loss now, but it's making room for legacy. Trust the shift. Trust the silence. Trust the exit. Because your destiny is too precious to be delayed by someone who is only meant to walk with you part of the way. Keep walking. God's not done building, but He is doing some cleaning. There's a kind of pain that comes from not knowing why they changed, why the connection went cold, why what felt so real suddenly disappeared without explanation. And in that silence, your mind writes stories. Was it something I said, something I missed, something I should have fixed? But there's a truth deeper than your questions. God heard what you didn't, and that's why it ended. You see faces. God sees hearts. You hear words. God hears motives. While you were trusting the surface, He was protecting your soul. Some people talk like friends but carry agendas. Some speak your language but don't speak your future. And you may never know the conversations held behind your back, the motives wrapped in flattery, the intentions buried beneath their smile, but God does, and He moves in mercy, not just in miracles. You thought His silence meant He wasn't paying attention, but sometimes His quiet is His covering. He doesn't always expose what He removes, He just removes it, because you don't need more heartbreak to learn the lesson. You just need to let go. His no isn't punishment, it's preservation. What left your life wasn't random, it was righteous. You just didn't hear what He did. That unanswered text, that ghosted relationship, that sudden shift, it hurt, but it also helped. Because it cleared the path, it uncluttered your heart, and it confirmed something heaven already knew. They couldn't go where you're going. They were speaking in rooms about you that you didn't know existed. And God, in His fierce love, said, enough, don't waste your energy reopening doors God shut with intention. Don't chase clarity when God is offering closure. You don't need to know everything, you just need to trust the one who does. If God removed it, let it stay gone. He didn't consult you because He's not trying to comfort your preferences. He's protecting your purpose. You prayed for discernment. You asked Him to expose what's fake, but then when He did, you called it loss. No, this was gain. This was growth. This was grace. It just didn't come the way you expected. Protection rarely does. So breathe. Let the questions rest. You're not crazy. You didn't imagine the shift. You just didn't see the full picture, but God did. He still does. And His silence wasn't neglect. It was strategy. You don't need to hear every conversation to know He's working. You just need to trust that whatever He allowed to fall away was never holding your future. The right people don't need hiding. The right hearts don't need filters. And the right connections don't need convincing. Let God keep building around truth and trust Him when He clears out everything that wasn't. What He removes, He replaces. What He protects, He promotes. You are safe in His hands, even when you don't understand the why. Sometimes the quietest seasons are the ones doing the deepest work. When people stop calling, doors stop opening, and it feels like life has hit pause, your first instinct is to panic, to wonder what you did wrong, to question why everything feels so still. But what if that silence isn't punishment? What if it's protection? You're not being abandoned, you're being preserved. What looks like isolation might actually be incubation. God often hides what He's preparing before He uses someone publicly. He often deals with them privately. That's not a demotion, it's divine strategy. Because exposure before maturity can ruin what God is building in you. So He pulls you back, not to withhold, but to strengthen. Think of Moses, 40 years in the desert, alone, hidden, forgotten by people but not by God. Or David, anointed as king but left in the field with sheep, isolated but not overlooked. That field was the training ground for the throne, and maybe your silence is the same. Maybe this hidden season is where your oil is growing. God will often remove the crowd to amplify His voice because He knows that wrong voices can drown out His direction. Not every opinion is meant to shape you. Not every influence is safe. So He clears the room, not to leave you lonely, but to lead you closer. Alone with God is a better place than surrounded by people who don't carry your future. Sometimes you have to be stripped of distractions to be clothed in destiny. And that stripping feels like loss until you realize what you gained. Clarity, intimacy, strength, discernment. You begin to see yourself not through the lens of comparison, but through the eyes of your Creator. And that changes everything. So stop despising the silence. Stop rushing through the stillness. This season may not be loud, but it's holy, and God is in it. He's not just calling you out, He's calling you in, into deeper trust, into stronger identity, into quieter strength. You may feel overlooked, but heaven hasn't missed a moment. God knows exactly where you are and why. He hasn't forgotten the promise. He hasn't canceled the calling. He's just getting you ready. And when the time is right, He'll bring the right voices, the right opportunities, the right doors, and none of it will require you to leave His presence to pursue it. Don't rush what He's refining. Don't despise the hidden place. What He's doing in secret, He will soon reveal in strength. This isn't punishment, it's preparation. And when you come out, you won't just be seen, you'll be sent. Charm can fool the eyes, but it can't fool the spirit. Just because someone is smooth with words, friendly in tone, or skilled in gaining trust doesn't mean they're safe for your soul. Discernment isn't suspicion, it's spiritual protection. It's how God whispers to your spirit what your eyes can't yet see. Because everyone smiling isn't for you. And not every open hand is clean. We live in a world that celebrates charisma, but heaven values character. The enemy won't always come dressed in darkness. Sometimes he wraps manipulation in kindness. Sometimes danger wears a smile. And if you're only judging by surface, you'll miss the subtle signs that something isn't right. That's why God gave you discernment, not to make you critical, but to keep you covered. Discernment is heaven's warning system. It's the feeling that won't shake, the lack of peace you can't explain, the check in your spirit when someone speaks, but something in you stays silent. Don't ignore that. God's protection doesn't always come through loud alarms. Sometimes it comes through quiet discomfort. When peace leaves the room, when they enter, pay attention. It doesn't matter how well they speak Scripture, how polished they present, or how many others seem to like them. Discernment goes deeper than public image. It exposes private motive And sometimes the people you feel bad walking away from are the very ones God is telling you to let go of, because their charm may win crowds, but it can't carry your calling. Jesus was kind, but he wasn't naive. He saw hearts, not just words. He didn't entrust himself to everyone who clapped, and neither should you. Some people are sent, others are planted, and a few are assigned to distract, delay, or divide. That's why you don't follow personality, you follow peace. The Holy Spirit will never lead you into bondage. If someone drains your spirit, manipulates your boundaries, or clouds your clarity, they may be charming, but they're not safe. God's people may not always be perfect, but they'll bring peace, not pressure. They'll draw you to Him, not to their own ego. So ask God to sharpen your discernment, to make you more sensitive to what's beneath the surface, because it's not enough to know people. You need to know spirits. That's how you protect your future. That's how you avoid traps dressed as opportunities. That's how you steward your time, your heart, and your calling. Discernment is a gift, not a burden. It's not paranoia. It's permission to walk in wisdom. Let it lead. Let it guide. Because in a world full of charm, God's voice is still the safest thing you can follow. Delay has a way of testing us. It feels like silence, like prayers hitting the ceiling, like everything is stuck while everyone else is moving forward. You start to wonder if God forgot you, or worse, if He's ignoring you. But what if the delay isn't denial? What if it's deliverance? That closed door wasn't rejection, it was redirection. God saw what was on the other side and He said, not yet, or even not ever. Not to punish you, but to preserve you. You were praying for breakthrough. He was protecting your heart. You were begging for the opportunity. He was blocking a trap. You thought He was holding you back, but He was actually holding you up. We only see the moment. God sees the lifetime. He sees who's really behind that offer. He sees what that relationship would have cost you 5 years from now. He knows what's waiting around the corner, and sometimes His greatest kindness is in what He withholds. What feels like a missed chance could be the mercy of heaven. God's not yet might have just saved your life. The delay might have protected you from a crash you didn't see coming. The postponement may have preserved your peace, your purpose, or even your physical well-being. But in the moment, delay rarely feels like love. It feels like being forgotten. It feels like standing still in a world that won't stop moving. And that's why faith matters. Faith isn't just for the promise, it's for the process. It's what holds you steady when you have no explanation. It's what lets you say, I don't see it yet, but I trust you still. Because even when life feels paused, heaven is never inactive. God is always moving, sometimes ahead of you, sometimes behind you, and sometimes in places you'll never see. Trust the timing even when it doesn't make sense. Don't rush to open what God closed. Don't force a season He's still preparing you for. There's a reason for the delay, and often the waiting room becomes the shaping room. It's where God does deep work in silence. It's where pride is stripped, roots are planted, and trust is formed. You're not behind, you're not late, you're not forgotten. You're right on time, heaven's time. And when God says go, no one will be able to stop what He's prepared. But until then, stay faithful in the pause. There's purpose in the stillness. There's safety in the delay. You don't have to understand it to trust it, because when God delays, He's not withholding your future. He's protecting it. Some ties aren't meant to be mended. Some connections, as close as they once were, ended because heaven said it was time. And yet we go back. We revisit old conversations. We refollow, retext, reopen doors God shut with intention. But when God cuts ties, He doesn't make mistakes. If He ended it, leave it ended. We get ourselves tangled up trying to keep what God already removed. Nostalgia is powerful, so is loneliness. but neither should be mistaken for permission. Just because you miss them doesn't mean you need them. Just because there was history doesn't mean there's still destiny. There's a difference between a lesson and a lifeline, and some of us are trying to build futures with people who are only meant to teach us something, then leave. God isn't cruel when He separates you. He's kind. He sees what you don't. He knows how certain relationships would unravel your calling, and when He cuts a tie, it's because He's making room for something cleaner, something clearer, something consecrated for your next season. Don't take the scissors out of His hand. Don't knot back together what He unbound for your protection. You prayed for clarity. Then God showed you their character. You asked for peace. Then God revealed their pattern, and still your soul wants to fix it. But loyalty to the wrong people can cost your purpose. Ask Samson. Ask Saul. Ask anyone who stayed longer than God said stay. The price is never small. You don't need another round of manipulation dressed up as reconciliation. You don't need to explain why you're choosing obedience over old comfort. You just need to walk away when God says go. And trust that He doesn't sever what He plans to salvage. It's not your job to save what was never safe. It's not your job to keep people in places they never respected. And it's not your job to hold together what heaven has already released. The peace you're praying for can't come until you stop resurrecting dead connections. Let it go. Let them go. Not with bitterness, but with boldness. Not with guilt, but with grace. Because when God removes something, He always has something better in mind, but you can't embrace the new if your hands are still holding the old. Obedience will always cost you something, but disobedience will cost you more. Don't let emotion lead you back into entanglements you were never meant to return to. Some doors stay shut for a reason. Some ties were cut to keep you free, and God's not trying to hurt you. He's trying to preserve what He placed inside you. Let Him. Let it be done. Let it stay closed. You don't need to knot it back together. You just need to keep walking. It hurts when people walk away, especially the ones you thought were rooted, the ones you prayed with, dreamed with, built life with. Their absence can feel like failure, like abandonment, like a piece of your world was pulled loose. But what if the exit wasn't an accident? What if their leaving revealed more than their staying ever could? God will let people leave to show you who's really meant to stay, not because He enjoys your pain, but because He honors your purpose. Sometimes you can't see clearly while you're surrounded by crowd noise, so He quiets the room. He lets the goodbye happen. He allows the fade, the fallout, the shift. And in that empty space, something holy begins to happen. Clarity walks in. Let them walk. You won't need who God doesn't send. You won't have to beg for what's meant. God isn't in the business of forcing people to stay who were never graced for your future. And if their heart wasn't aligned, their presence was only a delay. He doesn't remove to harm you. He removes to refine the space around you. Absence reveals alignment. It shows you who is standing with you and who is only standing near you. It draws the line between convenience and covenant. Some people are only present when it's easy, but purpose will expose who's willing to endure the process. And when God starts elevating you, it'll either bring people closer or cause them to walk. Let both happen. You don't have to fight to keep anyone. God's not calling you to manage the exit. He's preparing you for the entrance, because for every person who leaves, there's a new assignment, a divine connection, a fresh season on the horizon. And you'll miss it if you keep mourning what God already moved. Look for His entrance. When people exit, don't just look at the door that closed. Look at the door God is opening. What you lost in people, He will restore in purpose. What walked away as friendship, He'll replace with favor. You're not alone, you're aligned. This is the season to trust the shift, to stop clinging to expired relationships and start receiving the ones that match your future. Everyone can't go where God is taking you, and that's not rejection, that's preparation. So breathe, release, let peace settle where people used to stand. God knows who's meant to walk with you, and if they were really part of your assignment, they wouldn't have left your alignment. When God clears the room, it's because He's about to fill it with what fits. Trust Him, trust the exit, and keep your heart open for what's coming next, because what stays will carry the weight of your calling. Protection doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it feels like chaos, like the floor just dropped beneath your feet, like betrayal, confusion, heartbreak, or the kind of disappointment that leaves you breathless. And in that moment, it doesn't feel like God is rescuing you. It feels like He let you fall. But His rescue can look like ruin before it ever looks like redemption. We pray for peace, and then everything breaks. We ask for clarity, and the people we trusted vanish. We beg God to open the right doors, and then every door slams shut. But what if that's the answer? What if the breaking is actually the blessing? Because sometimes the very thing that shatters your heart is what saves your life. You were about to go all in on something that wasn't rooted in truth. You were ready to give your trust to someone who didn't value your purpose. You were headed down a path that looked right but led to wrong. And God stepped in, not with a polite warning, but with a divine disruption, and it hurt. Because sometimes rescue feels like loss before it ever feels like love. You see the mess, He sees the mercy. We assume protection always comes with peace. But the kind of peace that comes from heaven isn't always painless. Sometimes it looks like confusion first, sometimes it looks like disappointment, but it always carries purpose. Because peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of God in the midst of it. What you're calling betrayal, heaven is calling redirection. What you're calling heartbreak, God is calling healing in disguise. He's not punishing you, He's preserving you. You just haven't seen the full picture yet. But one day you will. One day you'll look back on the pain that nearly crushed you and say, "Thank you, Lord, for not letting that stay." Peace doesn't always arrive with answers. Sometimes it shows up through absence. Sometimes it's wrapped in hard endings and closed doors. But it always leaves you better than it found you, because the peace of God doesn't come to please your comfort. It comes to protect your calling. So if it's breaking right now, if it feels like everything is unraveling, take heart. God's not gone. He's guarding you. And though you can't see it yet, you're safer now than you were before it all fell apart. Trust the process, trust the pain, and trust the protector who knows exactly what He's doing. The peace you want may not feel like peace in the moment, but it will lead you straight into purpose. Some attacks don't come with horns and pitchforks. They come with smiles, charm, and I'm praying for you. Not every assignment from the enemy wears a warning label. That's why discernment is essential, because the most dangerous threats are often disguised as blessings. Some people entered your life like they were sent to help, but they were really sent to hinder. You didn't see it at first. They said the right things. They played the part. They even looked like answers to prayer. But something slowly started shifting. Your peace started leaking. Your purpose felt clouded. Your joy started shrinking every time they came near. What you thought was a connection turned out to be a spiritual distraction, and God had to step in. He didn't remove them because of your schedule. He removed them because of your spirit. He saw the compromise you were beginning to tolerate. He saw how their influence was slowly pulling you away from your assignment. And while you were still calling it friendship or opportunity, heaven called it an attack in disguise. God isn't just guarding your time, He's guarding your territory. He knows what's connected to your destiny, and He knows what's draining your oil. You weren't called to babysit spiritual threats. You weren't anointed to manage demonic assignments dressed in politeness. You were created to walk in freedom, not entanglement. When God reveals the true nature of someone's presence in your life, believe him. Don't let comfort keep you tied to what he's trying to cut. Don't let fear of being too harsh make you water down obedience. You don't owe access to people who are planted to sabotage your soul. Yes, love them, but loving people doesn't mean ignoring the voice of the Holy Spirit. It means trusting that God knows their heart more than you do, and when he shows you the truth, believe it the first time, because delay in obedience only deepens the damage. You don't need permission to walk away from what God already exposed. You don't need everyone's approval to protect your peace. Some people weren't meant to walk with you. They were sent to watch you, to monitor, to mimic, to divide. And now that God's shown you, it's time to act. Cut what he's cutting, end what he ended. Not in bitterness, but in boldness. Not in pride, but in peace. Because the longer you entertain spiritual threats, the more you risk your anointing leaking under the weight of what was never yours to carry. This isn't about fear, it's about freedom. And sometimes the path to freedom is paved with hard exits and silent goodbyes. Don't ignore the signs. Don't excuse the red flags. When God reveals an attack in disguise, he's not trying to hurt your heart. He's trying to protect your soul. Separation doesn't always feel spiritual at first. It feels personal, painful, lonely. You start to question what went wrong, why certain people distance themselves, or why things that used to fit now feel foreign. But what if the shift isn't punishment? It's preparation. What if God is separating you because elevation is coming? Before God increases grace, he clears space. He doesn't pour fresh oil into contaminated vessels. He doesn't build new levels on shaky foundations. He starts by removing what can't go where you're headed. Not everyone was meant to cross into your next season. Some were only meant to walk with you for a while, and when their part is over, clinging to them only delays what God wants to do. You can't step into new with old weight. Carrying yesterday's burdens, distractions, or attachments into tomorrow will slow your progress and sabotage your peace. God is a master gardener. He knows when to prune. He cuts back not to kill, but to multiply. He doesn't separate you to strip you of strength, but to make room for more clarity, more purpose, more power. Promotion often follows pruning. Ask Joseph. He was pulled from family, betrayed by brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison, and yet every painful separation was positioning him for the palace. He didn't see it at the time, but on the other side of the process, he looked back and saw the hand of God in every painful step. That's the part we miss. We cry over what's leaving while God is preparing what's next. We mourn connections that were only meant to be temporary. But God isn't cruel when he calls for separation. He's wise. He knows that elevation requires consecration, and consecration often means stepping away from what's common so he can give you what's uncommon. Yes, it hurts. Yes, the silence is uncomfortable. Yes, the stripping feels like loss. But if God is behind it, then it's making room for something greater. Don't resent the pruning. Lean into it. Let God remove what he must so he can release what he wants. Trust the separation, even if it feels like subtraction, because with God, subtraction often leads to supernatural increase. You're not being abandoned, you're being aligned. The isolation isn't empty, it's sacred. It's where God prepares hearts for higher ground. So instead of chasing what left, focus on what's coming. Instead of mourning who disconnected, rejoice that God is reconnecting you to purpose. The people who remain after the pruning are the ones who were graced for your growth. And the space that's cleared will soon be filled with something far greater than what you lost. So breathe deep, trust the process, and keep your eyes on the one who separates only to elevate. Loss is loud, it echoes through your thoughts and lingers in your questions. It makes you wonder why things fell apart, why the friendship faded, why the door slammed shut when you were ready to walk through it. But what looks like loss is often God's setup for something better, because when God removes, He never leaves you empty. He replaces. Every subtraction has a divine replacement. He never takes without intention. He never allows something to be removed from your life unless He's making room for something greater. You might not see it yet. You might still be standing in the ashes of what used to be. But trust this, heaven never leaves a space vacant. If God allowed it to leave, it's because He's about to fill it with more. More peace, more clarity, more purpose, more of what actually aligns with your calling, not just your comfort. What you lost isn't greater than what God is sending. You thought that relationship was everything. You thought that opportunity was your breakthrough, but God's yes doesn't sound like chaos. It sounds like peace, and if He removed it, then it wasn't the best, no matter how much you wanted it to be. You don't have to fight to keep what's not from God. Let it go, not out of bitterness, but out of belief. Belief that God's hands are not just capable of closing doors, but of opening better ones. His no isn't rejection, it's redirection. His not this means something better is coming. You don't have to understand it to trust it. You just have to release it long enough to receive what's next. Trust His no. He's making room for His yes, the kind of yes that doesn't drain you, the kind of yes that matches your anointing, not your anxiety, the kind of yes that doesn't pull you backwards but launches you forward. But you'll miss it if you keep grieving what God already called done. God is not done writing your story. That chapter may be closed, but the author of your life is just turning the page. What's coming will make sense of what left. What's ahead will silence the pain of what was lost. You don't need to settle for less when heaven is preparing more. Let the door close. Let the ties cut. Let the silence settle, because in the stillness, God is working. And when He replaces, He doesn't just restore what you lost, He upgrades it with more joy, with deeper alignment, with real connection, with purpose that fits. You may feel the sting now, but you'll see the beauty soon. So hold on. What left didn't ruin you. It made room. And what's coming will prove that God's plan was better all along.